in this edition of Generations. April is National Donate Life Month, and we speak to New England Donor Services about the organ and tissue donor world. The Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling discusses their work and why older people are more likely to become addicted to gambling. And Judy Jenks from seniorcenterct.org talks about all-inclusive holidays, the positives and the negatives. Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith and welcome to Generations, a new podcast for people of your generation. Have you ever thought about becoming an organ or tissue donor? Many people do, but many more don't, and it's becoming a real problem for those on the donor waiting list. April is National Donate Life Month, and I caught up with Amanda Gallipo. She works for New England Donor Services and told me what they do.
So New England Donor Services is the organ procurement organization for all of New England. Like I said, we cover all of the states in New England, including Bermuda, and we help facilitate not only organs coming in for transplant, but organs also going out. So we're helping, hopefully, a lot of people around the country and not just those in New England as well.
And tell us a little bit about your role. You're a hospital relations coordinator. So what does that mean?
So I do a lot of education. I work with the staff at the hospitals. I make those relationships with the teams and the ICUs and the emergency rooms and even on the floors. With the doctors and the nurses and the administration at times too, just to make sure that when, something does come up, they know who they can contact and who to work with and how to kind of maneuver around some of the situations that can occur.
Why is it, though, that in the 21st century, people are still wary of organ donation or becoming an organ donor?
That's something that the myths stand the test of time. I know when I was 16 or so, I was told that, if you put it on your license, they're not going to try to save you, or the myths that you're too old or you're too sick or, something along those lines. But the world of transplant medicine is changing every single day. So as silly as it sounds, you need to be somewhat healthy to be a donor. But we also don't really have anything that would preclude you from being a donor either. So there's not really anything such as too sick or too old to be a donor anymore like there used to be either. So there's a lot of weariness around what can be donated and who can be a donor, but pretty much everybody can be. And I think that's always kind of been the stigma is you won't save me. But of course, the people in the emergency room never, ever look at your license or your donation registry. They don't even have access to it a lot of times. So of course, they're going to do everything they can to save you. And the whole I'm too sick or I'm too old stigma is changing constantly with this world of medicine, and the transplant medicine is changing so rapidly as well.
The other thing to point out as well is there's been, as you said, with advances in modern medicine, the viability of transplants and the success of them just continues to increase year on year, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yes, for sure.
So what can you tell us about, if you want to be an organ donor, what is possible in this day and age, as you say, with modern medicine, so what can you donate?
So you can donate your heart, lungs, a liver, kidney, pancreas, and intestines for organs. Your lungs can actually be split, and you can have each lung going to a separate individual that might need it. Your liver can actually be split, and your first lobe of your liver can actually go to a pediatric patient now, even as an adult. And your kidneys can also be split and go to two separate individuals. So it's pretty amazing. But besides that, there's also tissue donation, which also can be life-saving in some ways. You can donate your corneas, so your part of your eye, skin, tendon, veins, pericardium, heart valves, nerves, among other things. And a lot of times those can be life-saving in some cases and definitely life-enhancing in a lot of other ways.
Is it correct that, one organ donor person can effectively help 8 people?
9 now, actually. But yes, they can.
Which is amazing.
Absolutely amazing.
What are the challenges facing medical facilities and hospitals, still when it comes to, the whole organ donor situation?
Honestly, the biggest part is education. So transplant medicine, like I said, is rapidly changing. But besides that, the staff kind of changes in hospitals and, some staff and some hospitals don't see a lot of transplants. So the kind of understanding behind them and how to, kind of recognize who could possibly be a donor and so forth is probably the hardest part. But we're very lucky in New England. We've got some really fantastic relationships with a lot of amazing hospitals, and they allow us to do education with the teams, doctors, nurses, respiratory, techs, everybody. And we also do a lot of huddles. We work with the hospitals to, again, make sure that they're recognizing those referrals and calling them in, and that we can work with those teams for education in real time, but also prior to even having them, because, like I said, everything is changing so rapidly.
And also still, I mean, one of the things I think that we obviously need to make clear about this situation when it comes to organ donation is speed is of the essence still, because the organs are only viable for certain amounts of time. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely.
Talk us through that a little bit if you can.
Well, so the problem comes in that, these patients, less than 1% of the population that even comes into the hospital is even able to become a donor. So it's a very small population to begin with. And then, everybody has kind of something underlying, even if it's something as simple as maybe asthma. But, we want to make sure that we're managing these patients and taking care of them, and also that we're taking care of them to making sure that there's nothing that could have been done more to have, saved them before anybody even kind of thinks about the idea of organ donation. And then from there, making sure that we can keep the patients as, again, healthy as possible, as silly as that kind of sounds, prior to even, moving into the donation process. So it actually can be very difficult, especially in patients when they've, been through so much. A lot of patients these days are, somebody who's been through an accident or somebody who's had an overdose of sorts. So a lot of those patients are kind of unstable as it is. So that, time is of the essence, of course, but we also want to make sure that we're doing everything we can even prior to the possibility of donation too. So
what would you say is the conversation that you should have if you want to be or sign up to, as an individual, to become, a donor?
We say regardless of whether you want to be a donor or not, to just have that conversation with your family. It is so difficult. I can tell you my dad does not like having the conversation. But, even somebody, I'm in my 30s and I've talked to my husband, I've talked to my family, and they just know my wishes. So that if God forbid something did happen, they do know what I would like. But you can always register if you, feel as though you feel very strongly about becoming a donor, and you don't want anybody to be able to overturn your decision. You can register, of course, to become a donor. But regardless of whether you do or don't want to be a donor, we always encourage you to have that discussion with your family, even if it's kind of in a letter to them one day, because it's just too hard to actually verbalize. It's just something that we feel would be important, again, regardless of donation.
Because, like we said, it's a difficult decision. And again, looking at some of the statistics I've been reading through, I understand that the refusal rate among families of potential donors is around 50%, which is huge, isn't it? Which means that a lot of people that could be helped, sadly, then don't get that opportunity. Absolutely.
We're very lucky in Connecticut. About 48% of the people here in Connecticut are registered to be donors, and a lot more who are not necessarily registered still support donation and would want to be donors. But again, their families might not necessarily know that if they haven't had that conversation. So again, regardless, we always encourage that conversation to occur.
You said previously about registering so that your wishes are observed. Can you talk us through that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So, you can always register at the DMV or the RMV. That's always been something you could do. But now Donate Life America is paired with the Apple iPhone. So there's an app on your iPhone that comes standard on every iPhone, and you can register there on your iHealth app. But there's also a website that's called registerme.org, and that's a national website, and that allows you to register but also personalize the gift that you would like to donate, or any kind of notes that you'd want to put in regards to your donation are available to be put there. So it allows that personalization, which is wonderful for people.
So if I was to go and do that tomorrow and register, does that mean that the law then recognises those are my wishes, and in the event of my death that my family will be advised of it but won't be able to overturn that wish?
That is absolutely correct, yes.
The amount of donations, do you have any sort of figures at all about, because it's bigger than people think, but there's still a huge need, as I understand it, for people to register as organ donors as well?
Absolutely. So there's 115,000 people currently on the national transplant waiting list, waiting for, any of these organs listed above, but 98,000 of them are actually waiting for kidney transplants. So almost 100,000 of those 115,000 are waiting for kidneys alone. But 115,000 people are on that list, and almost 22 people are going to die every single day on that waiting list. So there's still a great need out there. There is living donation now at times, so you can do portions of your liver and kidneys as a living donor. Those have actually skyrocketed a little bit in percentage from 2013 to 2018 here in Connecticut. Living donors have increased 28%. And, donation after passing, donation after death has increased 32%. All transplants have increased 81% over those 5 years. So there's been a great increase in transplantation as a whole, but there's also still a really great need out there.
And also, again, just without getting too technical, but I mean, the advances in modern medicine mean that, if you do have a transplant, if everything goes well and your body accepts it, you should go on to lead, a very good life for hopefully many years.
Yeah.
And again, do you think that's something that people have still got in their minds? It's a little bit Frankenstein science maybe still to them?
Perhaps. I mean, there's like you said, they hopefully would move on to live a healthy life, which would be wonderful and what everybody hopes for. But there's also those people who are on the list who have those modalities such as dialysis that allow them to wait a little bit longer for those transplants too. So I do believe that there's still that thought that it could be a little Frankenstein-esque, but I also think that, a lot of people are just happy to have their loved ones around a little longer too.
Thank you ever so much for talking to us about this incredibly important service, which is so easy for people to get involved in.
Thank you so much.
And if you want to become an organ or tissue donor, you can sign up with your state registry or the national registry by going online to registerme.org. Depending on where you live in the US, gambling is either legal or illegal. But whatever the situation, gambling for some can soon become a problem, leading to gambling addiction. I spoke to Diana Good, Executive Director, and Art Mongillo, Manager of Policy and Communications, who both work for the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling, about their organisation. Diana and Art, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's nice to talk to you again.
Thanks for having us.
So, Diana, if I can turn to you firstly, just quickly explain to us, what is the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling?
Sure. The Connecticut Council is a nonprofit here in Connecticut. We don't advocate for or against gambling. We just want to make sure that there are safeguards in place as we expand gambling in the state. We want to make sure that there are treatments available for people. There is advocacy so that we can make sure there's funding as we look at expanding gambling into an additional casino, possibly online gambling and sports betting.
So who actually, funds, the council? Is it all privately funded, or do you get any funding from the state?
We get some funding to the state from the lottery. So the lottery funds part of DEMIS, their problem gambling services, and part of that funding comes to us. The way we work with problem gambling services is we focus mostly on advocacy and prevention, and problem gambling services through DEMIS does a lot of the treatment. So we run the helpline, 24-hour help and chat line, and then when we have someone call us, we try to get them into treatment through problem gambling services. So we have a great relationship with them where we work hand in hand to try to get people the help they need if they've run into trouble gambling.
How big a problem is gambling in Connecticut, and is it a growing problem?
We've estimated there are upwards of 35,000 adults in Connecticut who suffer from disordered gambling. And as Diana mentioned earlier, with increased access, we worry that there will also be an increase in problem gambling. And you'll note that I said that there were 35,000 adults in Connecticut. We are finding now that many youth are susceptible to disordered gambling because of the gray area in things like video games, for example. There has been no formal study of youth in Connecticut, and so we have the sense that we might be dealing with just the tip of the iceberg.
You use the words disordered gambling. Can you explain what disordered gambling is as against maybe recreational gambling?
Well, social gambling, for example, is when social gamblers, they tend to gamble for entertainment. They're not prone to risking more than they can afford, and they gamble with friends. They tend to gamble for limited periods of time and are not preoccupied with gambling. Some of the signs of problem gambling or gambling disorder, for example, a person would show those signs if they need to gamble with increasing amounts of money to achieve the same excitement that they initially had. They would exhibit restless or irritable behavior when they're attempting to cut down or stop. They're preoccupied with gambling, thoughts of gambling, talking about gambling. They tend to use gambling as a coping mechanism when they feel distress, for example, guilty or anxious or depressed, Chasing one's losses is a real warning sign in terms of problem gambling, and they lie to conceal the extent of their gambling. So they're all sort of signs of a gambling disorder. We tend to call it disordered gambling rather than problem gambling nowadays because the vernacular and treatment is somewhat changed.
We used to call it addiction. Obviously, it's a disorder. There is a relation to possibly mental health and substance issues. Do you still find it, both of you, interesting that people do not see it in that way?
I think more and more people are seeing it in that way. I think gambling addiction is different than some of the addictions because you can't tell who the gambling addict is. Normally, they can still work, they can still function, they can still drive, they can still have relationships, they can do all of that and still be a problem gambler. With a lot of other addictions, whether it be food, alcohol, or drugs, you can usually tell that that person is addicted. With gambling, you just can't tell. That's definitely something, being fairly new to this field, that I have seen. I'll go to a conference and I'll look around the room and I'll wonder, who are the treatment providers and who are the addicts? And usually I get it wrong.
Looking at your website, you've got many resources for people who have, a gambling issue. Clearly, gambling affects everybody. I'm looking specifically at a leaflet which is gambling and older adults. Talk us through that particular demographic.
Sure, that's definitely a demographic that's hit hard by gambling. A lot of times, older adults don't have anything else to do, so they will start gambling out of boredom or because that's how they socialize and will run into a problem. Also, one of the things that we've found at the casinos is, although they're all going down together, possibly on a bus, once you get to the casino, you're fairly isolated. If you're sitting at a slot machine, if you're playing poker in front of a video screen, you're really not socializing. And that really spins that whole depression and loneliness aspect. So we see a lot of older adults are thinking that this is their outlet and this is their recreation, when in hindsight, it really isn't. They're not actually interacting and engaging with people at the casino.
And Brian, in terms of prevalence, up to half of older adults gamble. Upwards of 25% wager regularly, and the most popular forms of gambling among older adults are bingo, lottery, scratch tickets, card games, and slot machines.
What happens if they don't get a handle on it? What are the sorts of things that can ultimately happen in their lives?
They can lose everything. A lot of what you're looking at with retired people is they're draining their pensions, they're draining their retirement funds, and they don't have the time to make that up. With a lot of younger people who lose everything, you've got your whole life to try to make up that retirement package. But if you're older, you don't. And then you've got to rely on your family members because you've drained your 401k. So another issue with the whole gambling addiction is it can often affect the entire family.
Gambling and Parkinson's disease. Now, this is another condition which predominantly hits the older part of society. Talk us through that, because that's a very interesting, resource and a very particular thing that you've got on your website.
Yeah, well, as you know, Parkinson's disease is a degenerative movement disorder that causes tremors and decreased coordination. It's caused by the reduced activity of dopamine-producing cells in a part of the brain called the substantia nigra. And some of the drugs that are used to treat Parkinson's disease have behavioral side effects, sometimes causing impulse control disorders, which is very similar to the disorder that causes problem gambling.
So when it comes to actual treatments, Dana, you were talking about this at the top of the conversation. What sorts of things can you guide people to?
There are a number of treatment centers called Better Choice centers around the state. And there's also Gamblers Anonymous and Game Anon for family members. And also on our website, we've got lists of those treatment centers, and we've got lists of both Game Anon and Gamblers Anonymous meetings. So there isn't one size fits all for treatment, like most treatments to addiction. I'd love to tell you, if you're a gambling addict, all you have to do is call this number and go to this program, everything will be fine and you'll never relapse. And that's completely not true. So one of the things we definitely understand is we want to do everything we possibly can and have a real broad array of services for people so that they can find what works for them.
Tell us about the relationship that your organization has with the casinos here in Connecticut, because, of course, that is their business.
We actually have a very good relationship with the casinos because, yes, gambling is their business, but it is not in their best interest to have problem gamblers either. That's not good press for them. So both casinos in state, Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, have problem gambling departments, and we meet once a quarter, depending on the casino, sometimes once a month, to talk about strategies and ways that we can help problem gamblers. And one of the things that both casinos are interested in is a program called GameSense, which the MGM casinos have adopted and the Connecticut Lottery has adopted, which is a Canadian company that trains everyone at the casinos on how to spot a problem gambler. It's not just dealers and pit bosses, it's everyone gets some training. Food service, bartenders, valet, because often they're the ones that are going to see that someone just had a huge problem with gambling. But it really empowers the staff to be able to find out who to talk to if they do recognize that there's a problem gambler at the casino. So they can go to someone who's got counseling experience and they can take over the problem. So they don't have to sweep it under the rug anymore. They don't have to just keep walking by that casino player that they see day after day, week after week. It really empowers them to be able to go to the right person to try to get that problem gambler some help.
The work that you do is clearly very important, but are you ever sort of like seen as taking the fun out of, what people want to do in their pastimes?
I hope not. We really don't want to be the fun killers. And I think that's why we try to make it really clear that we're not for or against gambling. And that's such a good question because there are so many people that can gamble and have a good time and that can go to the casino and have a good time. And it is not a problem for them. And just like alcohol is not a problem for some people, but for a small percentage, it really is. Gambling is the same thing. So we really, I don't want to say don't care, but aren't overly concerned about the people who can gamble and not have a problem. We really focus on the people that do have the problem. And those are the people that we want to be there for.
Diana Good and Art Mongillo from the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. Ever so many thanks for joining us on Generations and sharing with us this very important news about gambling in our state.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
And if you have a gambling problem or know someone who does, you can find help and resources at ccpg.org or by phone at 888-789-7777. And finally, she's back from her exotic holiday. It's Judy Jenks.
And how are you today, Brian?
I'm good, thank you very much. So tell us all about it. Cancun.
Yes.
Mexico, of course, just for those in case they're geographically challenged. And it was an all-inclusive, so
yes.
Tell us all about it.
It was absolutely amazing. This place is huge, much bigger than I anticipated. And, of course, I had gone on the website and did all of those things. But it's actually 9 buildings. There's over 800 rooms, and there's going to be at least 5 huge pools. Plus, they have any number of rooms, and this is what we had, is you have this huge room, goes out onto a balcony, and then you can go into a pool. I would guess there's like a dozen rooms along these pools. They're like 4.5 feet deep and probably, 8 feet wide, and then go down along, the building. So that was, I loved it. You were able to be in there 2 or 3 times. There's no crowds. There's no walking to the pool, that kind of thing. And we were very fortunate. Ours was in the shade the majority of the day, so I didn't come back, all blistered and burnt up.
Which is very easy to do.
Oh, especially for me because I'm so fair. So that was wonderful. There's over 25 places that you can get food at. Anywhere from walking up, by the pool and getting a burger and fries to, a romantic dinner for 2.
Because that's always something that people worry about, isn't it? So, especially if they're going to a foreign country and maybe they're a little bit conservative in their diet,
right?
And they like their home comforts. It's like, am I going to be able to get this? Am I going to be able to get that? And the reality is, most of the time, I think you can, can't you?
I think there was everything that you could possibly want. Because first off, you're in a different culture. So they offered that range of food. And then there was all the American, Canadian food that we could possibly want. The different restaurants had themes. So, one was a seafood, one was a beef, and so on and so forth. So you could decide what you wanted to have that day and then find the restaurant that fit it. Plus, there was room service 24 hours a day.
Excellent.
So if you decided at any given point, I want coffee, or, you could just call and they would bring it to you.
Was that the attraction for you to have an all-inclusive holiday? Because obviously, they're not for everybody. Some people are like, no, I want to go and do my own thing. I don't want to be waited on, so like 24/7. What was the driver for you when it came to, let's have an all-inclusive?
It was my husband. My husband has always wanted to go to all-inclusive, and now he can say that he went. He did find, and I sort of knew that it wasn't going to be quite what he was expecting. He did decide it's way too big. So, if there's 800 rooms, there's over 2,000 people. We were in a section that was adults only. And then as you, went to the restaurants or, wherever you went, then there were the kids and stuff. So that was nice. But, well over 2,000 people there. Staff, there was staff galore. If you even thought you wanted something, there was a staff person. Either to direct you and tell you where you could get what you were looking for or to assist you in any way. If you were lost, you could just say, I'm looking for, and they not only would point you in that direction, they would walk you to wherever you were looking for. So it was very, very nice. It was... If anybody has been on a cruise ship, it's like a cruise ship on land that is spread out instead of up and down.
Ah, right.
And they're very, you could compare them, very well. I can't imagine anybody not enjoying it because you can interact as much as you want or as little as you want. You don't even really have to, especially if you get one of the rooms that has, the walkout pool. You don't really have to interact a whole lot if you don't want to. We found we met a lot of people because we would be out in that pool and people would be walking by and say, so how do you like that room? And we would talk a lot that way.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things, of course, people always concern themselves about when they do foreign travel is, what if I get ill? And it can happen. Mm-hmm. And, do I trust the local doctors, especially if it's a country where maybe English isn't the first language? Mm-hmm. So, what are your thoughts on that and, dealing with, if you do fall ill?
I did. So I did have that experience firsthand. Again, the facility, the all-inclusive, has their own doctor on staff. So I went to the doctor. The doctor offered me 3 courses of treatment for what was going on. She was very, very good. She spoke English very well. And, laid out the 3 choices. One of the choices was to go to the local hospital. She did say it was private. They would arrange transportation. And me inside my head is like, no, I'm not going to do that because there's that fear, the fear of the unknown. So I did take one of her courses of treatment. I did do that. About 2 days later, I decided that I really needed to talk to my doctor here in the United States. So I did call the practice. When I got a person on the phone, I identified myself and I said, the first thing you need to understand is I'm in Mexico. And I'm not sure if you're going to be able to call me back. Within, I would say, 7 minutes, I was talking to my doctor on the phone. She was going over, some of my standard things and suggested treatment. So it worked out very, very well.
Well, we're pleased to have you back. Sorry that obviously you had a little bit of an upset while you were away, but you're looking in fine fettle now, and we'll catch up with you again in the next episode.
Okay. Have a great day.
That's all from this edition of Generations. Don't forget to visit seniorcenterct.org to find out what's going on in your neck of the woods. And if you want to send us a topic to talk about or want to be our guest on the podcast, drop us a line by visiting the seniorcenterct.org website. Go to the bottom of the homepage and click the How to Advertise with Us link to get in touch. From myself, Brian Scott Smith, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.